All right, I've got my orange Berocca flavoured project bass on the bench today, and I want to get stuck into giving her a full setup, but there's a couple of issues I have to deal with first. One of the main ones is the way the neck and body are attached. If you watch the previous video, I spoke about 3 or 4 reasons that the neck is loose. So let's look at those. The first one for this bass is actually that the fretboard extension is actually fouling on the pickguard. So there's my 2000th feeler gauge, and yeah, I can't even push that in underneath the fretboard extension. So it's actually being held up by the pickguard. That will be really easy to remedy. I would just have to scrape a small amount of material off the pickguard in that area. But I'm actually not going to do that. I'm just going to take the pickguard off. There's no electronics or anything attached to it. It just sits on the body. And I'm going to leave it off until I finish the setup process, because I think there's a good chance, having played around with the truss rod and the bridge saddles already, I think there's a good chance the neck will need some kind of shim or an adjustment of its angle. And if I do end up doing that with a shim, it'll obviously raise the fretboard extension by the thickness of the shim, and it should clear the pickguard. So the next reason I think that the neck and body aren't really jammed up tightly together as they should be has to do with the finish on the neck pocket. So I'll take off the neck and I'll show you. You can probably see from the light just how uneven the finish is in the neck pocket. By feel, it was just really, really prickly and bumpy and uneven, and that's not ideal when you're trying to jam 2 pieces of timber together. The reason it's like that is because when you spray paint a piece of timber that you've machined or sanded, the first layer of lacquer wets the timber and all the wood fibres sort of stand up on end, and then when the lacquer seizes and cures, you're left with a really bumpy, prickly surface. And then if you don't denib that with a bit of, I don't know, 220 or 320 grit sandpaper just to make it smooth, when you lay up more and more lacquer, you end up, I'm guessing it's something to do with the surface tension in the lacquer, but you end up with a really bumpy surface because it seems to exaggerate. Every layer you add seems to exaggerate those peaks and troughs. So that's part of the problem. It's not the full problem, and it's really easy to fix. It just means I need to sand it. Okay, so I'm using a piece of melamine shelf material for dry sanding. This is actually pretty cool. It's very, very flat. This coating means I can peel the double-sided tape off. You need double-sided tape because I don't want to sand the edges, so I'm not going to wrap the paper around the block. The double-sided tape also makes it as flat as possible. This is 240 grit, I think, or 220, and I'm just going to sand this until it's flat. I'm focusing on the back of the neck pocket here as well because I want to start the process of adjusting the neck angle, and I might even get away with it. I might even get away without using a shim at all, just by removing the finish from the rear of the neck pocket and leaving the finish intact at the front. I've only just started, and obviously the dull areas are the high spots and the shiny bumpy areas are the low spots, and the finish is extremely hard. It's definitely an automotive polyester. I'm going to start with 120 grit because I'll be here all day with 240. Okay, so I've just switched that to 120. By the way, if my voice sounds funny, it's because I've got a dust mask on, and you should wear one as well. So I've got this little bike light. I'm actually shining it under the ruler just to make sure I'm staying level. Some parts here I'm just almost through to the bare timber, but that's okay. I'm planning to respray this guitar anyway. The one thing you do want to be careful is if you are getting close to the bare timber around here, you have to be careful you're not going to chip out the finish. So now most of the neck pocket is sort of uniformly dull. It's still a bit shiny towards the front, but I've been laying off that again, hoping to drop the back of the neck pocket slightly so that I might be able to avoid putting a shim in here when I set the base up. So I'm very nearly finished. So just one last check with the light, and that looks fine. This is hidden, of course, so there's no real reason to go and use other grits. I think this will be absolutely fine as is. So I'm going to move on. Another problem with the neck heel is that I don't believe there was any pilot holes drilled for the attachment screws. And when you just jam a screw straight into timber, you're left with a whole lot of debris around the screw, and especially in maple where that's really quite hard, that debris is between the neck heel and the pocket, and it's also another thing that's stopping the two from being cinched together firmly. It was really easy to fix. You simply just use a countersink bit, and I've just touched the tops of the holes with that. That'll fix that straight away. Another thing I've noticed with these neck screws is that there's two different sizes, and that's because the heel part of the body is ramped. So if your base is like that, don't mix them up, because if you put a long screw in the short end of the neck pocket, you may well end up lifting the fretboard off your neck heel. And finally, one of the real problems, in fact the main problem really with the neck attachment, was that these holes in the body are actually too small a diameter, and when you're using neck screws that have threads all the way to the head, they actually get jammed and stop turning when the heads reach the bottom of the hole. With neck screws like this, you can see there's a plain section just under the head, and when that reaches the bottom it'll just spin. But Cort have used these type of screws, and as you can see they just get jammed. It's a very simple fix though. You just need to measure across the threads. That's right on 5mm. So I'm going to use a drill bit around about 4.5mm and open those holes out. You want them still to be tight, of course, but you need to have it so that the screws can spin in the body, and that way it'll actually draw the neck heel down into the pocket and tighten it up. Oh, and if you're going to use a drill to put your neck in, make sure you set the clutch to maybe 2 or 3 on a sort of standard hand drill. I see a lot of bases where the screw holes have been stripped out of the neck heel, or the Phillips heads have been stripped and marred in the actual neck attachment screws. So yeah, if in doubt, use an old school screwdriver. That's rock solid. Let's move on. I think we need to look at the electronics. These little soldering joints aren't amazing. Yeah, that's no good. So I'm going to have to redo a few of these, I think.